You're listening to the Food City Podcast, the show that takes you behind the scenes of your favorite supermarket.
From new products, expert tips on meal planning, and all things community, let's dive in and see what's in store today.
Well, it is May, and we're celebrating Mother's Day this month, but it also happens to be National Women's Health Month, so it's the perfect time to kind of focus on all that encompasses women's health. And we are diving right in today, talking about some key concerns that women face all the way from adolescence to perimenopause, menopause, and then thereafter. And so we'll also explore some interventions from diet and just different lifestyle factors, in addition to some medications and supplements to help women feel their best at every age. And
every
so,
stage, yeah.
yes. Once again, I'm Nicole, Food City dietitian, here with Megan, Food City coach and health coach and pharmacist. And so starting right off, how does women's health kind of change and evolve as we age?
Yeah. Women do have a lot of different stages in their life. And as those stages change, so do the needs of what you need. During your reproductive years, your focus is usually just general well-being and hormone balance. But then as you move into perimenopause, which can happen in your late 30s, early 40s, which is a little bit
earlier than I expected.
Right. Your hormone levels begin to fluctuate, can lead to symptoms like irregular periods, some hot flashes, mood swings. So perimenopause is actually a transitional phase between your reproductive and menopause. It can last several years. Menopause officially begins, it's defined as when you have 12 consecutive missed periods. So, and once you get into that stage, your needs completely change. It's a natural part of aging, but it can bring a lot of challenges as well, of course. Yeah. Some of the biggest ones: decrease in metabolism, difficulty sleeping, hot flashes, mood swings, night sweats, all that fun stuff. So we'll just talk a little bit today about how we can manage these lifestyle changes, diet, medications that can all kind of make these more manageable and bearable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people don't realize just how long, well, again, how early. I was surprised by how early perimenopause starts, because you tend to think of it as all lumped into the same general few years, right around 50. And that is typically where menopause happens, those kind of 12 months between 45 and 55. But really, some of the changes associated with that and leading up to it start quite a bit earlier. And what are some of the major kind of health risks that women face as we age?
Yeah. Even after menopause, you continue to face health concerns that can be managed with the right medications and diet. But one of the biggest ones that we need to talk about, I think, is heart disease.
Yeah.
It's definitely an underrated or underestimated risk factor. And another statistic that when I was doing some research and you were doing some research is it is the number one killer of women. So that's kind of a scary fact to see and to hear.
Yeah, we don't necessarily associate that with women's health, at least not uniquely. Certainly the overall population, we talked about, we did a Heart Month podcast and talked about that, but really it is the number one killer of women. And so especially with menopause as you get older, with declining levels of estrogen and progesterone, that can increase risk of stroke and heart disease and high blood pressure. Again, the weight gain that you mentioned, it's all kind of tied together into one.
Yeah, and some risk factors for heart disease, hypertension, high cholesterol, family history. Yeah. Nearly 45% of women who are 20 or more have some sort of cardiovascular disease. So that's another kind of alarming statistic when you think about that. And then the American Heart Association has a campaign to kind of help promote awareness for this. So that's something to always kind of remember and look out and do some research with that so you can be aware of symptoms.
Yeah, absolutely. Going into kind of some of the other two risk factors, or not risk factors necessarily, but causes of mortality for women. So we've got kind of at the top, heart disease is the number one, and then cancer is going to be number two, with lung cancer being the most fatal. And of course, risk factors for that include smoking. Breast cancer is the most common. However, early detection can improve survival rates, and then colorectal cancer. And then that third one, which in my mind, I tend to kind of tie this in with heart disease because it is related, of course, but that is stroke. And so those are kind of the top three. Again, these are things that can face men as well, but we don't want to necessarily overlook them when it comes to talking about women's health.
Right, absolutely. So let's move on to just some key nutrients that might be beneficial in the different stages of life. So what nutrients do you think that women should be focusing on?
Yes. Well, women in particular, let's kind of go into women in particular first, because of course women are human beings. And so just like men, they're going to need a lot of the same things. So a regular, healthy, balanced diet featuring all kinds of nutrients is going to be important. But something specific for women is going to be calcium and vitamin D in particular. Because calcium, of course, we know women are at higher risk for osteoporosis. So kind of dense, porous bone, especially later in life. And so in the early years, adolescents and children, that's when you're building your bone. So it's really, really important to get adequate calcium. And for teenage girls, that's going to be around 12 to 1,300 milligrams of calcium per day. Vitamin D is going to help with calcium absorption, so that's going to be important as well. We've talked about sources of vitamin D before. Of course, the best source is going to be sunlight, but then food sources are going to include egg yolks and mushrooms that are exposed to UV light, fish with bones, and then some of those same sources for calcium, dairy, and yogurt. One thing that I wanted to talk about before we kind of jumped into, perimenopause, menopause, and then later life, but something that faces teenage girls, especially athletic teenage girls who are participating in sports, is something called the female athlete triad. This can face them anyway. And this is associated with a lack of menstruation. So the period might stop. There's a lack of available energy. So the calories are too low to support kind of just general health, your body functions, but also in addition to that, sports, and then kind of low bone calcium stores as well. So those three things. And that can result from exercising too much or eating too little. And so unfortunately with, body image issues that face a lot of teenage girls, it's not uncommon for them to eliminate certain food groups. It could be dairy. And so making sure that we're prioritizing adequate calories to support not only the activities of daily living, but the additional things that they're doing through, sports and exercise, and then not eliminating any food groups, making sure that they're getting adequate calcium from that. Another one, so calcium, it's higher in the teenage years, and then once women face, they're adults, 18 and older, it goes down to about 1,000 milligrams of calcium per day, and then after menopause, it's actually going to go up again to 1,200 milligrams of calcium per day, because of course that's when women are at highest risk for osteoporosis. So making sure those stores are higher. And then another nutrient that women tend to need a little bit more of and can fluctuate over the lifespan is iron. Of course, with menstruation, that can be associated with blood loss, and so making sure that they're getting enough iron. That could be from beans, red meat, leafy greens. Iron needs are also going to be higher during pregnancy as well. And then another one for women in particular is going to be folate. So folate is going to be the food form. Folic acid would be in supplement form. Now, this is especially important for women of reproductive years, because it helps to prevent birth defects in the fetus, in the growing fetus. And so for women of reproductive age, the recommendation is going to be about 400 micrograms per day. And then for pregnant women, 600 micrograms daily. So I know that is a lot. Those are kind of some of the micronutrients that are specific,
but they're all
for
really
women.
important.
They're all
so,
really, really
yeah.
important. And then getting into some more generic recommendations for women depending on life stage, but also this would apply to men as well. So protein.
Right.
And I think that this has gained more traction in recent years.
Yeah.
I feel like before it was bodybuilders and maybe more male dominated, the focus on protein, but in recent years it has gained more traction, and it is really important, especially as we age. And so the general recommendation, just to kind of support overall health, is actually kind of lower than I think most people anticipate, of 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. Or it would be about 0.33 grams per pound of body weight. And so for somebody who is 170 pounds, that would mean eating about 93 grams. Sorry, that would be even lower. It would be, I think, about 60 grams per day. However, after the age of 60, when metabolism decreases, it's associated with increases in fat mass and loss of lean body tissue. It's important to get a little bit more protein. So while your calorie needs are going to decrease as we age, your metabolism starts to slow down. You don't need to eat as much overall. Your protein intake should stay the same at the very least, but possibly even higher.
Yeah.
So 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight is the general recommendation. So for someone who is 170 pounds, that would mean 93 grams per day.
And that doesn't seem like it's that high, but if someone's having a hard time getting that much protein, can they supplement like protein shakes? Is that
absolutely? Yeah, absolutely. I think especially as you age, sometimes appetite, it can be associated with a decline in appetite. And so finding things that are very palatable to you is going to be really important. Generally, the recommendation too is going to be to spread that protein intake throughout the day. So that could be a quick protein shake in the morning mixed with a smoothie. It could be eggs if you like that, yogurt. And then, of course, meat we know is going to be a good source of protein at lunches and dinners, but also plant-based proteins. We can't neglect that. Yeah. And speaking of plant-based protein, that's another nutrient. B12, vitamin B12 is another nutrient of concern as we age because we tend to lose our ability to absorb that as well. But vitamin B12 is found only in animal sources. So for somebody who's maybe they're not necessarily a strict vegan, but they tend to not tolerate meat as well or not necessarily like as many animal-based products, then vitamin B12 can be a concern. It could be something to consider supplementing as well.
Okay. Sounds good. And then another important nutrient, I'm sure, is fiber. We talk about that a lot with everything.
We always do, because fiber is just really important for longevity for everybody. And the American population is consuming about half of the recommended intake. So for men, fiber intake should be around 38 grams per day. It decreases a little bit as you approach the age of 60. But for women, it's a little bit lower. It's 25 grams per day or 14 grams per 1,000 calories of intake per day. So the recommendations are generally based on a 2,000 calorie per day diet.
That's all really good info. So it's good to know, we don't always think of all the nutrients like B12 and folate. You don't think of that, but it's definitely important to make sure that we're getting enough of that.
Yes.
So let's go back to kind of our main topic today is just talking about menopause. So how can we manage menopause symptoms with diet? Is there something other than what you've already talked about, the main nutrients that can help kind of alleviate the symptoms? Not alleviate, but maybe make them
less pronounced. And of course, every woman is different in what they're going to experience. A lot of what you mentioned is going to be, of course, sleep disturbances. So waking up in the middle of the night, hot flashes, of course, are a very well-known symptom. And so generally making sure that you're going to have a regular sleep schedule that you can follow. That's not a dietary recommendation. That's just a lifestyle recommendation. Yeah. But how can you support that regular sleep schedule through diet? And some kind of obvious answers are going to be, of course, limiting your caffeine intake and alcohol intake, especially after a certain time of day, because they are sleep disruptors for most people. So they can wake you up late at night. Something else that I think could potentially help is actually having a little bit of carbohydrate in the evening so that you don't have low blood sugar that is going to wake you up and disturb sleep. Making sure that you're hydrated, of course, is going to help prevent some of the, or minimize some of the hot flashes. And then when you face menopause, estrogen levels decrease. And so something that can potentially help support healthy estrogen levels is going to be something called phytoestrogens. So these are plant compounds found in soy products, so soybeans like edamame, tofu. They might be found in lentils as well. And so that can potentially have some benefit. It's not necessarily going to alleviate or stop all symptoms, unfortunately, but these can potentially ease them. And then, of course, we always recommend increasing omega-3 fatty acids because they can help ease inflammation. So that's going to be your fatty fish, walnuts, flax seeds, chia seeds, and stuff like that.
Yeah. And then obviously things to avoid during menopause, you mentioned the caffeine. And I'm sure refined carbs is probably another one.
Refined carbs. So you might hear a trend. We're always talking about these for general health, and it is the same for women kind of throughout the lifespan, but especially as you age. So any refined added sugars are going to potentially upset that, but then the caffeine and alcohol as well. Yeah. So that's a lot of information that is kind of touching on diet. We hear a little bit about hormone replacement therapy. Yeah. So what are some of the risks, benefits, and how does it work to help manage symptoms, kind of veering off of the diet?
Yeah, it's hormone replacement therapy is probably the main way to treat it that a lot of women turn to, especially if it's affecting their quality of life and they just, are having a hard time managing or just want some relief. Maybe they've tried lifestyle modifications. Maybe they've tried supplements. It's not helping. So basically, it's going to treat menopause symptoms by it replaces your hormones that you're no longer making. So some of the benefits, obviously relief from the symptoms, hot flashes, night sweats, things like that. It helps with bone health. Estrogen maintains your bone density, so it can reduce the risk of osteoporosis and fractures in the future, which gets really important as we age. Heart health, if you start it early enough, it actually has some cardioprotective qualities to it, but if you start it too late, then it actually can have the reverse effects. So we'll talk a little bit about that in the risk section. And then just improved quality of life. I mean, if you're able to stop the symptoms or lessen the symptoms and get more sleep because you're not waking up with night sweats or you're not having hot flashes throughout the day, just improving the quality of life. So those are some of the benefits of it. But there are risks that come with it as well. And one of the biggest one is long-term use of it can increase your breast cancer risk. So that's definitely something to keep in mind, especially if you've got a history of breast cancer, something you might want to talk to your provider about. It might not be the best option for you. And then I said a little bit about the heart disease. If you started after age 60, you might be at a higher risk for actually worsening heart disease or stroke. So especially if you have existing conditions already. It can increase your risk for blood clots. So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind, especially if you are a smoker or if you have a family history of a clotting disorder, then something to definitely maybe consider before starting something like that. It can also increase your risk of gallstones. And then some women who report having mood swings, so maybe some mental health issues when you first start. So it's just something you have to kind of weigh the benefits and the risks, talk to your provider about it, and see if it's something that you think is right for you. Yeah. Women who are experiencing severe menopause symptoms obviously should consider it. If you're at risk of osteoporosis and you want preventative care, it's another thing to consider. And then if you're entering it early, if you enter menopause, 45, if you enter early like that, then hormone replacement therapy is probably a good option for you if you don't have any major risk factors contraindicating it. Yeah. But you should avoid it if you have a family history of breast cancer. That's definitely something that it's kind of a red flag you might want to really, really think about before starting it because it can increase that. And then if you smoke, have a history of heart disease or family history of clotting disorders, then it's definitely something to consider before starting it.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, because we started off the top of the podcast, they hear the top causes of mortality for women are heart disease, cancer, and stroke. And,
and those are possible risks.
And those are possible risk factors. So that can be alarming for a lot of people. What are some maybe ways to manage some of those symptoms without that intervention, without medication management, at least as a kind of first line of defense?
Lifestyle modifications, obviously, like we talked about, balanced diet.
Yeah.
Some supplements that are available out there are black cohosh. A lot of people will take that. It's supposed to help with the hot flashes, night sweats. Some people find relief with that. The soy isoflavones or evening primrose oil are also shown some benefits, so people will take some of those over-the-counter supplements. So those are things you might want to try, especially if you're just having minor symptoms or it's just starting or you don't want to consider hormone therapy yet. Then those are some options for you.
Yeah.
Some other lifestyle changes that you can consider, obviously, postmenopausal women want to focus on maintaining a healthy weight. Staying active can help with mood swings. If you're starting to have, anxiety or depression, exercise is a great way to kind of release endorphins and other feel-good chemicals that might help alleviate some of those symptoms as well.
Yes, yeah. I think it's easy to feel overwhelmed because a lot of it is just so interconnected.
Yeah.
The risk factors come with some things that can be potentially beneficial, for managing these symptoms, but at the same time, we are told, women are at higher risk for some of these things. And then managing a healthy weight is really, really important just for maintaining overall health. But at the same time, weight gain is something that is a kind of a symptom, or not necessarily a symptom, but it is associated, of course, with declining estrogen levels after women face menopause and just as we age in general. There's the increase in body fat and decrease in lean body mass.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people are making, you make mistakes when you're trying to lose weight as a woman, especially as you age. So some of the mistakes, I think, excessive calorie restriction, a lot of people will do that, and it kind of will have the opposite effect sometimes. So
absolutely right. I think one big question that a lot of women have, really of any age, is how can you support a healthy metabolism? And I think one of the biggest mistakes when trying to lose weight is going to be, like you said, excessive calorie restriction. Yes, if you're trying to lose weight, you do need to be in a calorie deficit.
Right.
That is just a fact. However, doing it too much is going to decrease your basal metabolic rate, and then it's going to be even harder for you to be able to lose that weight. So one way to support a healthy metabolism is going to be eating enough calories overall. And then especially physical activity in general is going to be helpful for maintaining skeletal mass, so bone mass, and preventing osteoporosis, muscle mass, and especially weightlifting is going to be important for that.
And I think that's another really common misconception is a lot of females don't want to lift heavy because they're afraid they're going to get bulky.
Yes.
But it does get more important as we get older to have the strength training and heavy strength training for the muscle mass.
Yep. And I think also just weight-bearing activity of any kind, so walking can be beneficial instead. While swimming can be a great form of exercise cardiovascularly, I think making sure that you are doing some sort of weight-bearing exercise is going to be helpful. So it just really depends on your starting point. And then another mistake I think people make when aging, facing weight loss, whatever, in terms of their metabolic health is going to be eating too little protein.
Right.
Especially as you are losing muscle mass, you really have to fight to maintain that as we age. And so adequate calories, exercise, and then adequate protein intake can be a little bit higher, as we discussed previously, than when we were younger, maybe per gram or kilogram of body weight. I think avoiding healthy fats, so doing some sort of low-fat diet in an effort to lose weight can harm your metabolic health, but also hormone health. So healthy fats are going to help support healthy hormone levels. And then things that we've talked about before, so over-reliance on convenience and highly processed foods that tend to be high in sodium, high in added sugars, refined carbohydrates, and then high in saturated fats. All of these have a negative impact on our heart health in particular.
Right, exactly. And then going back to just the nutrients that we need, there are things that can interfere with nutrient absorption. So that's always something to keep in mind. I'll just talk a little bit about a couple of the medications that might interfere with that. One of the main ones, proton pump inhibitors, is what they're called, but they're stomach medications. So omeprazole, Protonix, Prevacid, Nexium, they can reduce B12, which is one of the nutrients that you talked about, calcium, magnesium, and iron absorption. Diuretics, which are fluid pills that some people take for heart health, for high blood pressure, or for fluid retention. They can deplete potassium, so that's something to definitely keep in mind. Statins, which we've talked about some, which are for cholesterol, they can reduce your CoQ10 levels, so that can lead to muscle pain. So that might be something that you need to look into or supplement, talk to your healthcare provider about. And then the thyroid medications, that they can interact with calcium, iron. You want to take them first thing in the morning before any food or other medications of the day. And that kind of leads us to kind of the next topic that we need to talk about is just thyroid health, because that's another thing that plagues a lot of women, especially as we get older. It plays a really critical role in regulating our metabolism and then just our energy levels. And women are more likely to develop thyroid disorders than men.
Yeah.
Another thing that we're blessed with.
Well, so what are the symptoms of thyroid issues? Because I think there's also different ends of the spectrum. So hypo and hyperthyroidism. Yeah. So what are some of those symptoms?
So the most common thyroid disorder that women have is hypo, where it's too low. And that's when you'll get fatigue, weight gain, dry skin, constipation, depressed mood. But some of these symptoms, as we can see, kind of overlap with menopause symptoms. So you might be having a little bit of both, and sometimes it's hard to distinguish
which it
is. Yeah. Hyperthyroidism on the other end of the spectrum can cause anxiety, some heart palpitations. So that's just another thing to kind of keep in mind if you're starting to have symptoms like that.
And weight loss.
Right. And weight loss. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And really the only way to know is to get blood tests. So, and your doctor can do that and just see if you've got low levels of your T3 and T4 or high levels. And thyroid problems can affect your menopause symptoms. They can complicate them. I mean, like we said, they already kind of overlap a little bit, but it can worsen, mood swings, hot flashes, things like that. So medications for thyroid health and how they're used, they're key in treating your thyroid conditions. For low, the standard is levothyroxine, and that's the one that can interact with a lot of different nutrients. You want to take it first thing in the morning before anything else. If you have hyperthyroidism, drugs like methimazole can help reduce your hormone production. In some cases, patients need radioactive iodide therapy or surgery even. So definitely something to keep an eye on and make sure you're getting screened about once a year for that. So
oh my goodness. Yeah. There's so many things, like you said, because it does overlap with menopause symptoms, it can be so frustrating, I think, for women in, like you said, distinguishing kind of why am I having am I having these symptoms and what is the best treatment plan for me. Yeah. And I do think that is, it kind of highlights the importance of an interdisciplinary team. So your doctor and a dietitian can kind of help come up with a treatment plan for that.
Yeah. And then diet can, in fact, affect your thyroid health. So some things, I'm sure a lot of the same things are going to overlap.
Yes, they do.
Foods to help kind of support that.
Yeah. One that's super key in maintaining proper thyroid function is going to be iodine. So one of the main sources of iodine is going to be like iodized sea salt, right? Iodized salt. This is kind of the form that we typically consume. And selenium, zinc, iron, all of those things kind of have an overlap. So making sure that you're eating a well-balanced diet featuring, again, all different food groups is going to be key. Specifically eating seafood, okay? For selenium we talked about, but then again, those omega-3 fatty acids that help maintain brain health and heart health and reduce inflammation. Dairy products is going to be a good source of calcium. And then maybe meat or beans, some sort of plant-based iron-rich food that is going to kind of help support thyroid function is going to be important as well.
Yeah. And I think one of the main takeaways with all this and all that we've talked about is preventative care, getting screenings, especially to help reduce the risks and then catch anything early before it progresses. So just getting those wellness screenings, getting your annual screenings that you should be getting after certain ages and just being proactive.
Yes. women's health is certainly dynamic. It does change so much just throughout the month for one hand, but also throughout our lifespan, it changes a lot. And so again, getting those preventative screenings, making sure that you're aware of what's going on in your body, that your physician, your primary care doctor, your whole care team is on board with that is so key. And I feel like we could talk about this for so much longer, but people can learn more. Of course, we're kind of constantly writing about some of these topics, giving tips. If they are a member of Wellness Club, they can kind of have access to some of our thoughts about this, expert advice from us, and then recipe box as well.
Yeah.